to honor the lives and deeds of America's greatest heroes, the men and women who laid down their lives for our freedom. Today we pay tribute to their service, we mourn alongside their families, and we strive to be worthy of their sacrifice.
The United States has long been a nation that has had to fight for its freedom. Sometimes that fight is settled in the election process, and sometimes it is handed down by the Supreme Court. But sometimes we have to go to more dangerous means to protect our rights. Sometimes we must prepare for war. America has been involved in many wars. Some are merely one battle long, while others have lasted for years. Regardless, all of our wars take loved ones away from families. We owe it to the families of our fallen heroes to make their sacrifices memorable in the wars that we enter. Today, we'll go over 9 significant wars that have left their mark on history and will never be forgotten. The Revolutionary War. Everyone who knows anything about history knows how the United States began. After major government overreach from British Parliament, the American colonies decided to declare independence from Great Britain in 1776, resulting in a major war for our independence. At times, victory seemed impossible, but the Continental Army remained strong and gained the respect of British rivals France and Spain. America did the impossible back then. George Washington led the United States to a victory over one of the most dominant military forces in the world. We owe our rights and our freedoms to the men who died bravely in pursuit of independence. The War of 1812. In less than 2 decades after winning the Revolutionary War, we were already at war with the British again. The reason for war is disputed amongst historians. Some feel that James Madison was upset with Great Britain's intercepting trade ships in neutral territory, while others feel that national honor played a part in the decision. Regardless, we went to war and fought for 2 years before we negotiated a peace with Great Britain. That made it twice that the British failed to defeat America in war. Up to 15,000 Americans died in this conflict. The Mexican-American War. Mexico and America argued for a long time over territory, particularly when it came to Texas. In 1845, President James Polk wanted to expand as far west as possible and ordered the military to take Texas over by any means necessary. Thus began a war that lasted for a couple of years before a treaty was reached, giving the Americans their largest state yet. Over 13,000 men died in pursuit of Texas. Although many Mexicans refused to recognize the treaty signed by their government, and the war continued until 1848. Ironically, this wasn't the last time this issue would be discussed. The Civil War. Probably the most emotional of all American wars, the Civil War had been brewing since before our country even began. The conflict started when South Carolina seceded from the Union, and soon many other southern states followed suit. What followed was a bloody civil war over the rights of states and the immorality of enslaving people of different races. While the Union eventually won the war and the slaves were freed, the United States as a whole was badly bruised by the war. Over 600,000 Americans died as a result. Adding insult to injury, a Confederate loyal John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Lincoln, leaving the nation without its greatest leader going forward. The Spanish-American War. After the explosion of the USS Maine, the United States invaded Cuba, Puerto Rico, and a bunch of other Spanish territories in the late 1890s. The United States backed independence of Cuba, while Spain wanted to retain control of its western territory. Eventually, a peace treaty was reached, and the U.S. gained Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and temporary control of Cuba. 2,500 Americans were killed over the course of 7.5 months. The United States did not initially join forces during World War I. We did not see an interest in risking our lives for the quarrels of other nations. However, Germany remembered the dispute over Texas between the United States and Mexico and issued a sneaky proposal to the Mexicans. In exchange for their allegiance, the Mexicans would retain the lands of Texas that were taken by the United States decades before. The message with this proposal was written in code and eventually wound up in the hands of British codebreakers. Once the message was discovered, the British immediately forwarded the information to President Woodrow Wilson, who published it in every newspaper. The US declared war on Germany in 1917, and the war was over within a year. At least 17 million people died worldwide in this war. World War II. If we didn't learn our lesson in World War I, we sure did in round 2. Adolf Hitler rose to power in Nazi Germany and started invading European countries across the continent. Their Japanese allies began doing the same in Asia. The United States again remained neutral. But when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt called it a day that will live in infamy. The United States again declared war on Germany, and it was on from there. Eventually, the United States launched an attack on D-Day to push the Germans back into their homeland. After the Battle of the Bulge proved to be a desperate failure, Hitler committed suicide. After that, President Harry Truman dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japanese cities, leading Japan to surrender. The death count was outrageously large. Over 73 million people died over 8 years. The Korean War. The United States responded to an international crisis when the communist-supported North Korea invaded South Korea. The United Nations got involved, and many other nations also sent troops. What followed was a bloody 3-year war that ended with 3 million deaths, most of whom were civilians. Ironically, the war also inspired one of the greatest sitcoms in television history, MASH. The Vietnam War. In another communist-backed war, the United States sent troops to Vietnam. It was another instance of the northern half of the country invading the southern half. Up to 3 million lives were lost in this war. What looked like a similar conflict to Korea ended up being much different. While Vietnam stayed a unified country, the United States failed to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. This was not a great American moment. Despite the number of great wars we have been a part of, the United States is still the greatest country in the world. That's why everyone wants to come here. That's why we've grown so much over the last century. That's why we fight for one another every day. That's why we are who we are. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Also, check out my website at theissuepack.com and follow me on Instagram and X. Have a great day, everyone.